Hello and welcome to the Balticon panel on using writing prompts and exercises effectively. My name's Joshua Bilmes. I am the head of Jabberwocky Literary Agency and have been representing leading authors in the science fiction field for 35 years, including Charlaine Harris and Brandon Sanderson, both #1 New York Times bestsellers. And I proudly display behind me Nick Martell's books. Nick and I met at Balticon a few years ago, and that was the start to my selling his first book. So which I love, so I'm always happy to have that on hand at a Balticon. And I will have the other panelists introduce themselves. So far, I am 2 for 2 for forgetting to ask one of them. So if I forget to ask, let me know. Beth, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Beth Morris Tanner. I am a writer and poet and photographer, and I live down between DC and Baltimore. And I'm here because I love writing books and writing exercises.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Beth Durst. I write fantasy for adults, teens, and kids. My most recent book, The Bone Maker, came out in April from Harper Voyager, and it's about second chances and a lot of bone magic, and it's my 22nd novel.
Wow. And Scott?
I'm Scott Edelman. I just sold my 106th short story. Some of them are collected in a whole bunch of collections. The most recent one is called Things That Never Happened. I'm also the host of the Eating the Fantastic podcast, 145 episodes so far, in which I talk to writers over meals, or writers, agents, artists, etc., and discuss the writing, editing process. My career started 1974, 19 years old, my first day on the job at Marvel Comics. That's when I began in this life.
Now, one of the long traditions with Scott on a Sunday morning at a convention is that he goes and gets dessert for everybody, which we have unfortunately not been able to do the past couple years at Balticon, but I am trying to fill the gap a little bit. So at Scott's request, I went and got some rugelach and other treats. These come from Andre's Bakery at First Avenue and 57th Street in Manhattan. And just pretend, all of the panelists and all of the attendees, that I'm passing this around for all of you to take a taste of New York, even though it's Balticon on a Sunday morning.
Well, and speaking of that, I bought this 4-pound jar of jelly beans last year to hand out to everyone at last year's Balticon. And all I told you all was, well, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you at Balticon 2020, but in Balticon 2021, we will all gather in person and I will give you this. And I'm wondering, do jelly beans expire? I have no idea, but I probably should eat these and get a whole new batch of jelly beans for you for next year, or for the World Cup.
I will vouch those keep for a really, really, really long time. So I would happily take straight from that.
So I should hold on to them because they have a sentimental attachment now, because they were bought for what was supposed to have been the last or the first canceled convention last year.
So. Now, if you want to put questions into the Q&A, you can feel free to do it at any time. I'm a little more like not waiting to the last, 20 minutes in a virtual panel. So feel free to put questions in at any time. Now, we're kind of talking about food, and it seems a little bit of a joke, but a writing prompt can be anything. You can be told, here is plate of rugelach, or here is an illustration, and this has happened in the real world. Writers have been asked, here's a cover for Asimov's or Analog, write a story on it. Literally anything can be a writing prompt. So I'd like to start by asking the panelists, what is one of the most unusual things that ever prompted you in your writing? And I'll start that out with Sarah, because Beth seems still a little more thinking on it.
I'm pondering.
Am I going first? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Actually, my newest book, the one that I just held up, started because I'd written on a Post-it that I wanted to write a protagonist that had a coat with a lot of pockets, because I'm endlessly irritated that my iPhone doesn't fit into my jean pockets. So I'm like, I want a character with pockets. And then I just asked myself, okay, what does she have in her pockets? And my brain immediately answered bones, which probably says like way more about me than anything else I could tell you. So that's where the entire novel came from. I want better pockets and I like bones.
Beth?
I was trying to think. I think probably the weirdest one was being told to pick like the 5th random wiki page that you came up with. Cycle through the give me a random Wikipedia page. Give me a random Wikipedia page, and I ended up with some like 1920s or 19 teens pop song that was an anti-war pop song, but also kind of had some political stuff going on behind it. And that led to a very interesting story about hell.
Could you elaborate what led from the pop song to hell? I'm a little short.
It was a sort of right around the end of the First World War pop song. And it was something about sending people down below. And I think that I ended up deciding that was hell. And so it ended up being bureaucracy in hell.
Okay. And Scott, for your 100 and some stories?
Well, I don't know that I would consider this to be
any weird prompt.
This was an unexpected one because, so often with prompts, we're deliberately seeking a prompt. We're putting something in front of us and hoping something will come from us. I was on the way home from a convention when I'm always a blur and a buzz with energy after that. And on the plane, someone had left a copy of Newsweek in the little pocket in front of me. And I normally don't read Newsweek. I picked it up. I started flipping through it. And 2 different things caught my eye that I shoved together. One was, it was an article in there of letters written home by soldiers, the letter that you're supposed to have when I die, if I die, please present this to my loved one to say bye. And there was on the back page, editorial op-ed page, there was a famous Ernest Hemingway quote, which goes, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places, but those that will not break, it kills." And the quote goes on, and I ended up, the 2 things, just immediately I had an entire story in front of me in which I told a post-apocalyptic story of how it happened, with a series of about a dozen such letters written by a dozen different people who don't expect to come back alive. It sort of passes the torch and the timing of it from one person to the next as they tell what they're about to do and how they hope they might succeed or not succeed, and you learn in future letters what happened. But that was that was an unsought prompt, but only unsought to the extent that we have to be alert all the time for whatever the universe throws at us.
Now, back in my teenage years, when I thought of being a writer, one of the things I did was I picked up some books. Barry Longyear, a writer who people don't talk about much, but he did something called the Science Fiction Writers Workshop 1 that had different writing exercises in it. And that's another part of what the panel description tells people we're going to talk about, is possibly books, magazines, websites that offer prompts. So switching from the kind of impromptu and offbeat, is there anything that you would recommend to an aspiring writer as a source of good writing exercises and prompts? And Scott, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I will share something that I just did myself. I have about a dozen story ideas, and none of them particularly called to me to be the next one to write next. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to look back at every anthology call for stories of the past 2 years and make a list of them, whether they're closed or not. I mean, it has nothing to do with whether the story is going to that anthology. It just had, okay, let's pretend I had to write a story for that anthology. And I made a list just in the last year and a half to 2 years of 50 different anthologies that were open. Some were not paying anything more than copies, but still the idea can spark something. And we've got everything from hard-boiled detectives in space, supernatural railroads, military conflicts, strange religions, monsters adapting to the 31st century, alternative Australian history, where did all the elves go, and on, and dates from hell, menopause-themed horror, working class horror, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, looking at all of these, 50 of them, I just sort of said, okay, I'm just going to sit here with this list and meditate, blue sky on them. Let's say I did separate entirely from the market itself. Let's say I wanted, to write a story. Deep Space Once Earth is Dead, Female Samurai, Mardi Gras, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a ton of stuff out there, and I find that those, and often by the time I write a story, if I write a story, the market doesn't exist, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be attached to a market. If it's a good story, it can go anywhere. So I recommend that as a virtual reality glitches, mashed up fairy tales. Did I say technology gone bad with furries? Did I say that one? I don't know, but that was not one I was going to do. But anyway, this was just the first week of May. I sat down. And if you go to Rollin.com or what is it, Horror Notes or Hell Notes, I can't remember. There are a whole bunch of sites out there that have market listings. And it's not really useful for a magazine, because most magazines, you can't say the word fantasy and science fiction is not going to give me something. I mean, often the prompt has to be a little more narrower than that. So I do recommend that this is a wonderful way of just sort of throwing something on top of the mulch pile, letting it sit there, meditating, and seeing if anything comes up. And this is a prompt you can always do. 2 years from now, if you look back a year, you'll find a whole different set of those. So I recommend that.
And to just ask quickly, have you compiled this list somewhere where people can get at it who are in the audience?
Well, actually, at the moment, it just exists in my notebook. But once this panel is over, I will type in these 50 anthologies on Twitter if I don't have to rush immediately into my 5:30 panel. But look on Twitter, and sometime today, I'll give you a list of 50 markets that had been open sometime in the past past 2 years that you can use as a potential chum in the water.
Okay, and Beth, do you have any prompting source that you would?
I have a couple. There is a Tumblr called, I think, something original like Writing Prompts that puts up new prompts every day or two. And sometimes they're completely don't spark anything, but about once a week, something will go, that might be interesting. And then sort of paralleling Scott's model, I keep a Google Doc, just an endless Google Doc of things that strike me. They could be song lyrics, they could be a phrase, they could be a title, they could be something I read that is completely interesting, but not in the context in which I read it. And I just sort of add things to it. And then I can use that to kind of mash up with either a prompt that I find online or an anthology call or something to kind of get some ideas flowing. And then there are a lot of folks who do, and I'll try to think of some and put them in the chat, but there's a bunch of writers who do like a Friday prompt or a Wednesday prompt or something where they put in either a picture or a suggestion or something that's interesting on their website or on their Twitter feed. And then it's like, oh, maybe I'll think about that.
And Sarah?
Yeah. I do a similar thing that Beth does. I have just a Word doc that I have titled Idea Snippets. And anytime something cool comes along, I just shove it in there. There's this myth that ideas come as these lightning strikes and you're super inspired and you know everything about your story and all the details and blah, blah, blah. And occasionally that happens and that's lovely. But usually it's more just like a little spark and then another little spark. And when they collide, that's when you get the fire. I was looking at my bookshelf before this started to see if I had books on writing prompts, and I found this one. It's called What If? I was looking inside and it says, Sarah, hope you have fun with this book. Merry Christmas, 1990. Love, Mom and Dad.
Oh.
So I've had this a while. I have to admit, I haven't looked inside it in probably like 20 years. But the title, What If, is one of my all-time favorite writing prompts. It's just to write what if, and you spend like 10 minutes and you just do what if this, what if this, what if this, what if this. And somewhere in there, something's gonna pop out that you're like, okay, that's cool. My other favorite is to type at the top of a Word document, things I think are awesome, and just make a huge list of things that I think are awesome, grab 2 or 3 of them and ram them together and see what happens.
The late, great Kate Wilhelm used to talk about brainstorming that way. And she would say, discard like the first 5 things you come up with, because it's the ones that you get to further down the list that are going to be really meaty and interesting.
And Beth, is there any single, if you look at the arc of your writing career, is there any particular like inspiration or prompt for that which was most helpful or kind of most setting you on the path of writing?
To be honest, I still have my paperback copy of Very Long Years, Writer's Workshop 1, published by Owlswick Press in years ago. White cover, red decorations. And I started with that, and I honestly collect writing books. And I always figure that there's something in each of them that will be interesting and or spark me. But most recently, Lisa Cron's Story Genius has been a great inspiration.
I'm tempted to see if my copy is still like survived somewhere. Same question to you, Sarah. Is there anything that was just like a kind of particularly inspirational moment for you?
I think it's the books that I loved as a child. Alana by Tamara Pierce. I have this crystal clear memory of reading her book when I was 10 years old. I just decided that I desperately wanted to become a writer. I'd never met a writer. I didn't know a real person could become a writer. I thought they were all like mythical or dead. I remember reading that book and closing it and thinking to myself, if Alana can become a knight, I can become a writer. And that feeling when you close a fantasy book, that you can be something more than who you are, you can be strong, you can be brave. That's what pushed me forward into writing. And that's what I always try to capture in my writing. So I think that feeling you get from the books that you love.
Do you remember which Tamara Pierce book it was, or?
It was the very first one, Alana, the First Adventure, from the library with the old cover on it. I must have taken it out of the library like 20 times before it occurred to me that one could like purchase a book.
And Scott?
Well, I think it comes down to the what if that Sarah was mentioning. The first thing I ever wrote as a kid, I remember I was a big comic book fan. And back in those days, this was pre-Marvel and DC having any kind of team up. You didn't have the Superman meets Spider-Man books and the things, the Batman meets the Hulk that they eventually started doing in the 70s. And I was in the single digits of age back then. And I wrote a whole adventure in which all the Marvel people and all the DC people ended up in the same story. So basically, I guess I began writing that. Of course, I was not thinking of being a writer yet. That did not come until my early teens, but I thought, hey, I want to actually try to write a story. But that came out of there should be something in existence that is not in existence, and I must make it exist. And that's how that came about. So that was really the first time I wrote anything.
Now, when you were working at Marvel, did they ever have anything in the nature of like a prompt to get story or storyline?
Well, I created my own prompts at that point. Back then, there was a period when all the comic books were late. The company did not like that. In fact, there was one time I remember the production manager came into the bullpen and said, I've been talking to our printer. He's wondering if we're still in business. That's how late we were. It was John Verporten, the late, great John Verporten. Anyway, they wanted people to do backup stories to allow the people doing the lead comic to have more time to catch up. If they didn't have to do a 20-page comic, then they did a 15 and we did a 5-page story, they'd be able to catch up. So this is sort of a prompt because they said, well, come to us with characters you think are deserving of being a 5-page story, the secondary characters. So I made a list of 25 different characters who I thought were deserving of their own 5-page adventure. And the funny thing is, 2 of them just had TV series on Disney Plus, because one of them was, I did a 5-page story about the Vision. I did a 5-page story, about other about Falcon and so on. So that's sort of a prompt, because they said, oh, they want stories. Let me come up with a bunch of characters, and if they approve the character, then I got to figure out a story to then pitch about that character. So that was something I did as a 20-year-old. Just come up, here's a list of underused characters at the time who aren't in any ongoing adventure, who having a little story about them won't mess anything else up. So they give us a prompt, but prompts were well, except at one time they told me, oh, Omega the Unknown is late. Do you want to write an issue, and which artist do you want to draw it? And they gave me a choice of a couple of artists, and then I was like, okay, now I got a prompt. I got to come up with a story about that character that I think this artist's skills are good to come up with. But other than that, no, it's not like there was something they put in the hat that you pulled ideas out of.
Interesting that we've all come up with list ideas at various points in this process. Because I think back to Ray Bradbury's, he kept a list of interesting words, and that was his sort of when I need something to think about. And that's how you end up with a lot of his stories that just are the something, because those were the words off of his list of interesting words.
Yeah, I think once you start a list, you're giving yourself permission to suck. You know what I mean? Like if you're just trying to think of one thing, you're so stuck on the one thing where you say, oh, I'm just going to start writing random things down. Eventually, you push through the terrible one and get to one that might click. And there's something about the list making process that allows you to go and then and push forward until you break through and come up with something that you go, oh, wait, gee, that one really, maybe there's something to that one.
I think that's a hugely important point that Scott just made. A lot of writing prompts, the point of it is to conquer fear. The biggest barrier, I think, to writing is not believing in yourself enough and not trusting yourself, not trusting your instincts, and writing prompts and little tricks. And like, I sometimes will lie to myself and be like, this scene I'm writing isn't going to actually be in the book, so it can be whatever, type, and then I totally put it in the book. But like these writing tricks and these prompts are all to get you around any fear and any doubt that you have and get you to the story. Because it can be paralyzing if you sit down and you say to yourself, now I shall write a fantastic novel. And you're like, okay, where do I start? It gives you a place to start. It makes it less scary. It demystifies it. It gives you a way to start climbing that Mount Everest.
One of the things about exercises that I was thinking about as we were sort of getting ready for the panel is the exercises that get you started. So like if you're staring at that blank word processing screen and you're like, okay, what am I gonna do here? And there's sort of like calisthenics or like, you know, stretching before you run or warming up before you do a sport. It's like, oh, let me just do some words. And like you said, lie to yourself that this isn't gonna be in the book to kind of get yourself rolling. And then it's like, oh, now I'm into the story, and now it runs away.
Yeah, I firmly believe that no writing is ever wasted.
Has anybody ever had a dream as a story prompt? You know, the classic thing, I woke up in the middle of the night and jotted something down in my notebook. Has that ever happened? Could you tell us about that, Sarah?
Funny, it hadn't happened to me like ever, and it was one of those, I was like, oh, that's sweet, that must happen to other people. And then it did. I was like, oh yay. I had this dream that there was this girl that was barefoot in the desert and she was dancing under the moonlight, and she knew that when the dance ended, she would die. And she was okay with that. And I woke up like really worried about her. And then I wrote a book. That one's Vessel. So yeah, it totally happens.
Beth, Scott, you've been dream stricken?
I have a lot of dreams, but only one or two that ever managed to turn into a story, because dream logic often does not make any sense when you put it into story
Well, that's true.
I mean, there was one, and I go all the way back to comic books. There's a story that ended up being, that was called Nobody Believes in Vampires Anymore. That was a 5 or 6 page story in House of Mystery or House of Secrets in one of those comic books. And I had the full dream of, you know, some guy who had a skeleton with a stake through its heart that he was going around and giving a big spiel and charging a quarter to, you know, come look at the vampire, but nobody really believes it. And some other guy who steals it. And of course, when the stake comes out, the skeleton he's carrying ends up coming back and turning into a full vampire. I'm sure it probably didn't make that more sense than that, but that's what those stories usually were, the twist ending where the evil person ends up getting it. But that was the only one that I think ever turned into a dream. Where my dreams happen and where they cooperate is with an ongoing story. I often wake up knowing the next line of the story that I didn't know going to sleep. So that's entirely different from a dream giving me a story prompt. But I often wake up with, oh, that's what the next scene is. That all the hard work that I might do struggling to find what the next scene might be will not come into being. Also, being in the shower helps. I actually finally waterproof paper. There's a company called Aquanotes waterproof paper, because often in the shower when I'm thinking of something, or when I would juggle and my mind would be focused on juggling, and you're not thinking about the writing, all of a sudden the next sentence would pop up. And I had too many times running from the showers, all soaked up, running for the paper, where I almost broke a leg as I slid across the bathroom or something. And now I purchased Aquanotes paper. It's waterproof. You put it with a suction cup on the shower with a pencil that you do it all. And when the idea comes to me, I can just quickly write it down in the shower and not have to worry about it. So
I thought at one point about buying those soap crayons that like you give to kids to keep notes in the shower, because the shower is a great
that's
place.
what I was looking for, and I found this waterproof paper. So I only started using it like 3 months ago, but that has helped because a lot comes to me in the shower.
If there's one unexpected thing I hadn't been thinking from the panel, it was that the word for the day would be soap crayons. So
if you were
I feel like I'm ready to do a rewrite of The Graduate now, where instead of plastics, it'll be soap crayons. Okay. Has anybody ever been inspired by an overheard conversation And that was a writing prompt that I was given almost 40 years ago to the day in a creative writing class I took in the summer of 1981, was like, listen to a conversation and write a story that incorporates it. That ever?
I eavesdrop a lot,
Mm.
particularly because I used to take the DC Metro to work, and you would get all kinds of really interesting conversations taking place on the train and on the Metro. You sort of like pull out your little notebook, or these days pull out your phone and sort of type yourself some notes. I don't necessarily get it word for word, but there's often like, well, what happened before that? Or what's going to happen next?
Yeah, that's the main reason I can't write in coffee shops and cafes, because I totally just eavesdrop. I always wish it was like socially acceptable to walk up to strangers and be like, so how did you get to be you?
Have you ever asked somebody you were with, though, like, what do you think that couple is like? I mean, that happened, I know, to my mom at a restaurant near Rockefeller Center. She asked me when I was in high school, like, do you think they're, you know, like that couple that we're talking to? That a thing, or?
Well, I haven't done that for stories, but I've certainly been in a group of people, and you're looking over and you're pretending you're saying what the conversation is actually going. She's breaking up with him right now, and she's saying, "No, you know, don't come. I'm going to send your stuff." And then he's saying, "Please forgive me. You know, I won't do it again." And he said, "Oh, you'll do it again," but you know, whatever. And or you'll just go around and say, "Okay, that one is a disgraced gym teacher who had to quit school." Coaching, and you know, that person over there, and you just sort of make, but they never turn into a story. It's a fun improv thing to do, but I don't know about the rest of you, if it is ever something like that ever turned into
Make up backstories for everybody you see.
yeah, I mean, but
Yeah.
you four of us having dinner, you just look around the crowded restaurant and you or at the bar or whatever when you
Yeah. Yeah, I totally assign backstories to people and try to decide what magic power they would have if they had one, and what sort of talking animal sidekick would belong to them.
So, now just, we don't have a single question from the audience. Like, are we either that uninteresting, or are all of you in the audience that uninteresting? Is there not a single question that someone's going to put in the Q&A? Because soon we're going to just start making up backstories for people
for
in
each member of the
attendee
audience.
list, I think. And that'll be a good panel on
Well, on
writing.
Twitter earlier, we were talking about hunger. You know, I was saying how I use hunger. There are two things that I use to come up with story ideas when I say, I have no idea what to write, let me come up with something. My stomach and my bladder. And I force myself, I say, you're going to sit down on this couch or on this bench, and you are not getting up until you have 10 stupid ideas for stories. No matter how stupid these ideas are and how silly they are, you're not going to eat, and you're not going to the bathroom until you come up with 10 stories. Now we'll just sort of sit around and say, okay, is there anything I can think of about a ghost? Oh yeah, ghost that does this or that. Or actually, I had a story about that that did actually happen as a result of sitting there. And one of those 10 stories was a woman who wants to haunt who wants to haunt her mother who has Alzheimer's. I came up with, how do you come back and haunt someone who no longer recognizes you? So you come back and the person has no idea who you are. And that, when I came up with those 10 stupid ideas, I say, how do you haunt the person who has Alzheimer's and doesn't know who you are anymore? That turned into a story, which was one of my, yeah, that's a tough one to read because it ends up, you know, getting into a whole lot of things with what happens with parents. But occasionally you come up with a lot of really stupid ideas. But you know, I do that with multiple things. I do that with come up with 10 stupid titles or 10 titles for stories you may never write that sound like titles that will make someone want to read the story. Come up with 10 opening lines. You can't get up and come up with 10 opening lines for stories you may never write, but sound like something that would make someone want to read the next sentence. And occasionally you come up with something, and under the pressure of, you mean I'm not going to ever eat again unless I come up with 10 of these things? Often it happens. So yeah,
I'm not doing that. I like food too much.
but it's that
Titles
permission
are
to
another-
suck thing. It's okay, write
Yeah.
them down no matter how, yeah.
Titles
So-
are another great prompt, though, which is people, if you have something, there are a couple of them online. I'll see if I can find one and put it in the chat, that are title generators. You pick your sort of genre and it gives you the blood in the stone or whatever. And just, even if they're dumb, again, they get the juices flowing.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions we have in the chat, is whether there are good sources of writing prompts that we can find online. So if any of you want to add to the links that are going into the chat, that'd be that'd be great. I think there's an interesting question from Bernie. Do the best ideas come suddenly, or do they come like during your work hours? Like, are they improvisational or kind of, choice, as it were, for coming up with your best writing ideas? So, Beth, what's your experience been?
Tragically, work is one of the best places to get ideas. And every work notebook I have has scribbles in the margin with little stars next to them for me to remember that I wanted to write something about something completely unrelated to whatever meeting I was in.
Anyone else, Sarah, Scott, want to add on that?
Most of the best ones come by accident. When I'm just talking with someone and then all of a sudden they go, wait, that thing that we just said, that's a story. I remember I was having a conversation with someone. For some reason, we were talking about Seinfeld, and somehow it got to talking about the Garden of Eden. And I started doing a Seinfeld impression and going, what is this about that tree of knowledge? What about those other trees? Why doesn't anyone ever talk about the tree of this and the tree of that and the tree of this other thing? And all of a sudden I said, wait a second. What about those other trees other than the tree of knowledge? Other things happen when you eat the fruit on them, and that ended up turning into a story. But it wasn't that I was looking for a story at that moment. It just sort of snuck up on me. And every once in a while, there'll be a meal with a bunch of writers, and an idea will come by that all of a sudden you all look at each other and say, okay, who's going to take that? And even if everybody did, it would end up all being different stories anyway. But every once in a while, there was something that just happens by accident in conversation.
Mine usually come about very deliberately, actually, through writing regularly. I write every day, and I will sometimes sit down deliberately and say, I need a new story idea. What do I think is awesome? And I just type and I just babble to myself. Oh, I think this is cool. This is cool. This is cool. What if I did this? What if I did this? I think the most important thing when you're coming up with ideas is not to squash them too early. To start asking them questions and if this were true, what else does that imply? Or what sort of character would be most ruined by this happening? That interrogation of the idea will let you see if it has enough weight to be able to bear the weight of a story. But I always compare it to if you have an idea, you don't want to yank it out of the ground to see how well that carrot is growing, because that carrot will stop growing. So give it a chance to grow. Don't squash your ideas too early.
And Sarah, then kind of related to all of this, question that's in the chat is, you're in a rut on a current project. What can you do in terms of prompts or other tools to try and get the wheels unstuck?
Couple things. Well, you could always add a talking cat, a dragon, or an explosion. That'll throw you out of it pretty fast. You can also do things like writing a letter to yourself or to a character, and just open up a document and try to figure out, why do you love this story, and get back to that. Or you can rewind to the point in the story when you did love it and take it in a new direction and see where it goes. Allow yourself to play. I often think that you have to pay for good writing with a certain number of pages of bad writing. So for me, the cure is always write more. You know, even if you write 10 pages you're never going to use, there might be something on page 8 that takes your story in a whole new direction. So it's worth writing those other pages that won't go anywhere to find that one on page 8 that's going to make you fall in love again.
Yeah, one of the
Beth?
great, oh, go ahead, Beth.
One of the things that Sarah's point just brought to mind is the idea of sort of turning off your internal editor and just writing. And one of the tools I love for that, although it's completely hokey, is for the words, because you fight little monsters while you're writing, and it forces you to sort of spew words at a particular pace that doesn't allow you to stop and think, oh, well, that doesn't sound good. Oh, let me take that out. And it just lets you kind of free flow. I wouldn't use it necessarily for like revision or for complicated scenes where you had to work through it, but for that kind of, I'm stuck, I need to get things going, it's great.
Yeah, I'm going to toss out one of the great getting stuck stories that I ever heard. It was John Crowley was talking about being stuck on his novel. I believe it was the novel Four Freedoms. And he had no idea what was supposed to happen next or what the characters were supposed to do to get where they're going. And Tom Dish said to him, I think they should go dancing. And this is a book set in the 40s. And okay, he sent these characters dancing, and that sort of unlocked the whole thing by just, okay, they're not going to do anything particularly urgent to moving the plot forward other than living their lives, and that unlocked who the characters were and freed them up. So I thought that was a great thing. And actually, before I forget, one great writing prompt, which is not quite a writing prompt, for those of you who are members of the Science Fiction Writers of America, every Sunday at from 5 to 7 o'clock, we gather in, not this Sunday, I'll be here at Balticon. They gather for a writing group on Zoom, 15 minutes of chatting, saying what you're going to do, what scene you're going to work on, or whatever. 45 of writing, then 15 more of chatting, and 45 more of writing. And knowing that you have to do something on having that date, for some people, it freaks them out. But I find it really unlocks it when you say, okay, I got 45 minutes and I want to tell someone in the next 15 that I did something, and you're off to the races. So if you happen to be a member, check it out. And they have different guest facilitators each week to keep us in line.
Christopher Burke in the chat asks, what's my backstory? So let's say that you are a writer and you have a character that you want to interrogate to write a story on them, which I think people do all the time. You know, a character's there and you're wondering, what are questions kind of we would ask Christopher if he is a character that's come to your mind, to try and figure out what his backstory is, what his want or story is going to be that we're going to sit down and write. Beth, what would be the first question you would ask?
The first one is, what does he want? And closely
Okay.
followed by, what is he afraid of?
Okay. So is Christopher going to put some of these answers in the chat for us?
Or we're all going to write stories about a guy called Christopher.
See, I would not ask Christopher any questions. If we were here together, on a panel, and I say, I'm going to make up a story about that guy sitting in the audience, I say, oh, well, that guy Christopher over there, let's see, he showed up. He thought there was a mortician convention at the hotel this weekend, and then he discovered, hey, it's the wrong convention. What's going on here? And he sat down for this other convention, and he's looking around saying, boy, these people are weird. Now, morticians, they're really the ones who had their heads screwed on right. And then something goes from there.
I do like Beth's answer, though, because like in a Broadway musical, there's the I wish I want number at the start, because we're supposed to know what the character wants, what motivates them, what's going to drive us to care about them in the musical. And I don't know that it should be different in a book. Sarah, are there any other questions that you would ask?
No, Beth said exactly what I was going to say. That's what I do with every character that I write. I write down what they most want and what they most fear. And anytime I get lost in the story, if I start to lose what their voice is, I come back to those core questions. What do they most want? What do they most fear? And if you're ever searching for a plot, you just make what they most fear come true. There you go.
I still think Christopher is a mortician. He lost the body that he was supposed to deliver to the family. And so what his want is, he is looking for some body. He is looking for someone who's about the same size and same age that he can pass off to the family. And so he's looking around the room while we were on the panel. And one of us will be gone next year.
So,
And
wow,
Sorry,
Scott,
Christopher.
you're being really morbid this afternoon.
Well, last weekend was StokerCon, so I guess I'm still in the horror writer frame of mind.
So, we're heading into the final few minutes, so I'll just go around. Start with you, Scott. Would you have a final minute on topic of something to give the audience to take with them?
I'll just toss out yet another prompt. I often go to the National Gallery of Art when I happen to be in DC. Joshua's, I know you go to DC. If you just wander around and say, okay, what the hell's going on in this painting? What's the real story? What are their wants and needs? And that's online as well. You don't have to be there physically. You could just go to the National Gallery of Art or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I think they all have random generators. Show me a painting. And if you're blank, you can just go through flipping through those paintings until you come up with anything. Any random thing, and give yourself permission to be silly, and then you'll eventually arrive at something that will suit.
Beth?
I really like that idea. I'm also a big fan of reading like the back page news. So the stuff that's not page one front and center that everybody's going to see, oh yeah, that's about this event. But the little kind of personal interest local news stories are often full of ideas.
Okay, Sarah?
What Scott said at the very end, give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to play, give yourself permission to write about what you're passionate about, things that capture your imagination. You don't need anyone else's approval. Just write things that you love.
Okay. And so, other writers, because I think it's interesting, the writing process. We mentioned Barry Longyear's book, which I'm sure used copies can be found, or Samizdat editions online. Stephen King's On Writing is a really good book, I think. Is there any other one resource? Quick final question. Beth?
Don Moss's basically anything. His writing the breakout novel workbook is good. And pretty much any of his books or lectures are really good because they're a consistent list of questions that force you to think about your characters.
Sarah?
I love Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. That was one of my favorites.
And Scott, take us home with the final
Not necessarily a
suggestion.
single resource, but make yourself a list of every science fiction, fantasy, and horror trope you can think of. The big dumb object, degeneration, starship, time travel, immortality, whatever. And imagine an editor has called you up and says, I've got a space for one more story. It's yours. Give me 5,000 to 7,000 words.
Great.
And see what happens.
So we've reached the end of our 50 minutes. Some of us might go over to the Discord. What room are we in for this panel again? Let me go and check that. We are in
Washington.
the Mount. I've spent the whole weekend in the Mount Washington, but I'll go into the Discord for Mount Washington and see if anybody has any questions there. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and my panelists were just fantastic for this. Thank you to all of you.
And thank you for the rugelach, Joshua. It was the finest I've tasted in my life.
You are very welcome, Scott. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the con.
Yeah.